guys, Brian from Starlite Pulp here. Thanks for coming by. I appreciate it very much. Tonight we have episode 3 of the Starlite Pulpcast, and my guest tonight is singer, songwriter, swing, and jazz crooner, as well as just kind of a retro and vintage gentleman extraordinaire, Mr. Johnny Boyd. How you doing, Johnny?
True, except the gentleman part.
There you go. There you go. So a lot of people are going to know you as a musician from Indigo Swing.
A lot of people do, yes.
You were the front man for Indigo Swing. Were you also one of the principal singer-songwriters there?
I wrote most of the songs.
Okay.
But we all contributed in some way. But I wrote probably all the lyrics to the songs.
Okay.
But we had great musicians in the band, so
right.
It was a group. Some of those songs are more of a group effort than other songs, but yes.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. And so in the movie Swingers came out in 1996, right? And so we have a really big kind of swing revival at that point. It's kind of the torchbearer, if you will, right, for this whole new. I mean, let's be honest. For a lot of people, a lot of the kids that were listening to it, it was their first introduction. Like, so they're not thinking, bassy back in the 30s and 40s. They're thinking Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, Indigo Swing, and Royal Crown Review.
Right.
And so there's this swing revival in the mid to late 90s, which was a lot of fun, honestly. And you had all these bands, right? You had you guys who were one of my very, very favorites. You had Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, who is still performing and doing their thing. You had Royal Crown Review, who I believe has disbanded. And then there were other bands like the Cherry Poppin' Daddies, Atomic Fireballs, LaVey Smith and her Red Hots.
Right. That's another San Francisco band.
There you go. Ingrid Lucia and the Flying Neutrinos, I think, right, was her band. You had like the Squirrel Nut Zippers, which weren't really swing, but they were, kind of in the ballpark. And so you had this whole revival, this whole movement of music that a lot of people hadn't heard before. So how did you, as a songwriter, but also as Johnny Boyd in the band, how did you guys get involved in that way?
Well, my first exposure to it was Royal Crown Review, playing at the Club Deluxe, and I want to say 90, 91.
Okay.
I can't remember the year, but it was around then. I saw a picture of them in the pink section of the Chronicle, which was the arts part of the Pull-Out Sunday thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they just looked, amazing. They were in the 40 suits, and they just looked, and they had, they're all the horns were lined up there, the 3-horn guys.
Yeah.
And it just looked, amazing, right up my alley. I grew up listening to crooners in my house. My dad loved Tony Bennett and Bing Crosby, and
sure.
And it blew my mind to see that. And I bought a ticket to that show, and I went there. And if you've never been to the Club Deluxe on Haight Street in San Francisco, it's just tiny. It's not even set up as a kind of a recording venue or a performance venue. And I got in there, and it was just hot as hell, and it was just absolutely packed with people. And people were on top of people while watching these guys play, and the band was surrounded by people, and people were dancing too. So you not only had everybody packed in there, but everybody was dancing, and they're swing dancing.
Yeah. And
they're just throwing their heels around, doing, aerials. In the club, it was insane. And I remember, and the other thing was everybody was wearing their grandparents' clothes.
Right.
And I remember just going, this is absolutely amazing. And I really wanted to be a part of that. And so very soon after that, I put an ad in Bay Area music magazine, BAM magazine, for musicians.
Yeah.
And I started talking and put a small band together and started getting my chops on becoming a performing musician. That's how I got into the business. And the songwriter part came after I gravitated to better and better musicians, and we really started playing around town and playing a lot of weddings in the wine country.
Mm-hmm.
So we got really tight. And the musicians that I was working with really liked the project because they were making great money because we were working. I was booking the hell out of them, and they were making money. And so we got really tight playing. And then finally, we decided that we wanted to hit the road and play outside of the Bay Area. And we did. But we realized that to be special, we had to, I realized, I think, more than anybody else,
right,
that we needed to have new material because everybody was playing the same jump blues songs from these old records that everybody loved, you know? And there's nothing wrong with that. But it was kind of the Beatles thing when Beatles started writing their own music.
Right, yeah.
So that's kind of, I got started writing, getting my feet wet with writing with a couple of guys in the band. And that's how we started writing. And eventually that led to a publishing deal and a record deal with a major label because they all wanted to be part of that scene too. So that's kind of how it started. But Royal Crown Review, hands down, in my opinion, they're the trailblazer. They're the ones that put everything in motion.
Yeah. They were a big band too. Like you said, they had a lot of horns.
Like 7 pieces.
Yeah.
Three horns in the band.
Yeah. That's okay. So that's awesome. So you guys put out your first album in, I want to say 96 or 97?
95.
Right? Oh, okay. Oh, the self-titled. Yeah.
The self-titled, and that was in 95.
Okay.
And that had, I think, 4 or 5 original songs on it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we initially started touring around the country selling. We sold that little record at our shows and out of the trunk of our car, anywhere we could pedal them.
So just a personal question here because as you can probably tell, I'm a total hat nerd. The hat you have on that cover, that is a fantastic hat. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and pull it up on the screen here.
Visual aids.
That hat right there, for those of you who can see it, some will be listening to this, they won't see it, but you still have that hat anywhere?
I probably do. I mean, if I don't, I should be ashamed of myself. I want to say that I probably still have it because I think I've kept all of the clothing from all the photo shoots and album art.
There you go.
I was smart enough to do that. I want to say that's like a champ, like a Penny's champ, unlined. I want to think. I think I.
Oh, it's unlined. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I've got a similar one here in that it's this one's lined, but it's unblocked, right? So you can just kind of pop it out and pop it back into place. You know,
those are the best ones.
Yeah, and they're rare these days. You know, they're hard.
I'll say, yeah, they are.
But I had to ask you that because I remember that literally. Well, if it was 95, then I probably bought it in 95 or 96. So for 20 plus 25, 6, 7 years, whatever it is now. I remember that hat, and I'm like, oh, that's a great friggin' hat. I gotta figure out where that is. All right.
Yeah, thank you.
So talk to me about there were, like we talked about a few minutes ago, there were all of these bands at the time, and I personally, one of the things you'll never hear from Starlite Pulp as a company is we're not ever going to knock somebody else down. Okay, that's never ever. But and so I won't speak badly about any of those bands or anybody in them. But it did seem clear to me as somebody who grew up a jazz fan and who was now listening to all these swing bands that some of them were really rooted in jazz, blues, and swing, and some were maybe just making the most of an opportunity, right? That was presented.
Yeah, you could probably say that.
And you know, I mean, look, anybody who's an artist knows that guy who is, you know, he's in a punk band, and then he's also in a ska band, and then, you know, he does some you know, German pop on Sundays. Yeah, and it's not a criticism. You're just being a working musician. That's fine. Right. But you did kind of get the feeling sometimes that some of those bands, it was like, ooh, there's an opportunity at swing. Let's do that. as opposed to being rooted in it, you know?
Yeah, I think that's probably true in any scene.
Mhm.
That happens. I like to say they were taking advantage of the opportunity for fun
There you go.
because people wanted it. It wasn't
They
like
did.
they were
They
like
did.
out there doing tribute shows, cover shows of other bands.
Yeah.
They were making music that people wanted to see. And we talked about San Francisco and Los Angeles and West Coast. There was definitely more opportunities and more interest in that kind of music at the time on the coast.
Mhm.
But what do you do if you're in Detroit?
Right.
If you live in Detroit and you don't, you're not flying around to the coast, what do? And you can buy the records and you can listen to and have, parties where you live. But those bands, a lot of them came out of areas that didn't have kind of the same opportunities to grow, get better,
True.
and to expand their horizons as they were, as
No,
they did on
absolutely.
the coast. And I look at it that way. But one of the things that I had so much respect for like a band like Royal Crown is because
Mhm.
they took it to another level other than just kind of grinding through the motions of putting a band together, learning music, recording music, selling music, repeat, rinse and repeat. They made their own music. They
did.
wrote their own music.
Yeah.
They You could tell they were interested in how they presented their show,
Mhm.
and what they were wearing and how they interacted with their fans. They were not phoning it, and they were not.
No,
They
not at
were
all.
not a
Yeah.
band, and other bands weren't taking advantage of a wave that they could jump on.
Sure.
And what happens is that just like your favorite noir films or your favorite books, they just because they come out at a particular time doesn't mean that nobody else um, can do it or doesn't belong trying to do it too. But what happens is 20 years later, here we are talking about this.
Mhm.
And the bands that you rattle off who are your favorites
Mhm.
are the ones that rise to the top and stand the test of time.
Right.
And the reason for that is because of their drive to be unique
Mhm.
and create new things and write, and the ones that do that in any scene
Mhm.
always stick around
Yeah.
and
No, I think you're right.
are on the tip of people's tongues for decades later. So
Yeah,
I
I think
think
you're
that's
right.
what happened in that scene. I think that's honestly
Okay.
what happened.
So tell me this, and this is not a gotcha moment. I don't want you to name anybody at all, but from the bands, when you were together, was there, because it was this kind of revival scene all of a sudden, was there a sense of camaraderie or was there a sense of competition with the bands?
Both.
Okay.
I mean, there are some, people have their own personalities, and you have just wonderful people, and you have people who aren't. And I know who those people are, and we all do.
Yeah, of course.
But we definitely, had friendships, and we would crisscross, in the clubs.
Okay.
And yeah, so it's just like any business. If you've ever been like, say if you're going to hire a house painter, if they're booked solid and they send you to another company to paint your house because they treat you fairly, and they have an understanding, and they're not going to send somebody down to a company that's going to rip somebody off because it makes them look bad. And so bands, had that kind of respect for each other if they were professional,
Mhm.
and they wanted to survive in the business, and they wanted that kind of role to keep happening. Then there are other band leaders who do not handle competition well.
Right.
And instead, and that is basically showing that they are unsure of themselves, and that there's fear there, and they're intimidated, and they're trying to overcompensate. That's usually with human beings. That's usually what
Absolutely.
happens.
Absolutely. No, I mean, absolutely. People who are generally open and accepting
Right.
and inclusive
Right.
are going to be, generally speaking, more brave and
Right.
more confident in who they
Right.
are, as
They're,
opposed to
they're ready. They've made their own luck. They're ready to be, and they're not afraid of somebody else getting opportunity because it just makes them better.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Cool. So two more questions here on this, and then we're done with this particular segment. So, first off, favorite club to play back then?
In the entire country?
Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of variations on that. There was the enjoyability factor of playing as a performer,
Sure.
and then there's ones that that the audience really liked.
Right.
Those are the ones. I think probably a club in San Francisco would be a favorite club to play. There was a club called the Highball on Broadway in San Francisco, where before we hit the road, we had a regular Thursday night there. And I think I would have to say that that's probably one of my favorite clubs, just because all my friends were there. All the people I knew locally that I'd played for up to that point would go, and they were so into it, and they were drinking highballs. The bar was really good,
and you're playing for your peeps,
and you're playing for your friends, and you try new material, and say you're safe to do that. Mm-hmm. And then there are other shows that the audiences really would love. I mean, we did a couple tours with Brian Setzer, his orchestra, and those are amazing rooms. Every show I think was sold out and just packed, but and you were on a schedule,
I'm sure
you couldn't go 30 seconds over the time allotted time, but the audiences were just, especially in Germany, and they would go crazy. So the enjoyability of performing was not as fun. However, the audience made you feel like it was so worth it to be there.
Totally get that.
Sides of the coin.
Yeah. Huge Brian Setzer fan too. I mean, both the rockabilly stuff as well as the orchestra. That's awesome. I didn't know you toured with him, so that's very cool.
Yeah, I learned a lot just by watching how he did things, and how his band did things. It was fascinating, especially a big band in that day and age.
Yeah, big band is right. Yeah. All right, so that was the first of the last two. Now, craziest show you ever played?
Crazy in what way? Like streaking?
However you choose to define it.
Well, it's not one that I would necessarily ever want to do again, but I don't know if it's necessarily crazy. But we did a show once in Phoenix at what looked like a condemned club.
Okay.
And they supposedly had a room to change. We were on the road, so we roll. This is what happens: you pile out of the van, you drive for 7 hours. You make it barely in time for sound check, which is usually in the afternoon sometime. You pile out of the van, you unload all your crap, get it onto the stage, and you wait around for the sound man to wake up from somewhere and come over there. You're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting. Finally, you get to do sound check. By this time, you've got like an hour and a half to eat, change, shower, have some sort of normalcy before you can actually go on and do a killer show for 3 hours for the audience to pay to come see you. And then you wake up at like 7 the next morning, pile in the van, do all your crap, and go do it again, drive for 7 hours. And, I mean, it is a young man's game.
Yeah.
So anyway, this club in Phoenix, we played, I think it was a condemned club, but there were still people there. And the promoter told us there was a place to change in the back, and there was not. It was a kitchen. They weren't serving food anymore, but it was a kitchen, so it was neglected. And we changed in the dark, no lights. We changed in the dark, and then somehow made it through the show. Did the show, came back to get our stuff out of the kitchen, and somebody had a flashlight, and I realized that I had changed for that show in broken glass.
Nice.
And I remember, and then we piled out. We couldn't believe that we'd made it. Got into the van, piled out, and we found out the next day that the promoter stiffed us. So
wow.
So that's not necessarily a good crazy show.
No, yeah.
But those are earlier teeth cutting.
Yeah. Yep.
shows about how to be a
Yep.
performing artist
Yep. Yep.
on the road.
It was a learning experience.
Yeah, and then some.
Yeah. All right. Cool. So, okay. So let's move into, like I said in the introduction here, retro vintage gentleman extraordinaire. You are. We both are, but I'm not going to put myself even in your category. But we're both kind of vintage clothes freaks. And it's getting harder and harder to do that these days. What's hilarious is if you look up like the definition of vintage when it has to do with clothes, the definition is 20 years.
Yeah.
So something from 2001 right now is considered vintage, which is
dusting.
Which is crazy, right? So when I think of vintage clothes, I think of the 30s, 40s, 50s, and up to the 60s, and that it kind of stops there. Not that the 70s isn't vintage, but I don't want anything from the 70s. But, so, and then the 80s and 90s. I mean, we grew up with that, so that, that's not. So, but when say for example, my wife and I used to shop vintage in even the mid 90s, we'd find a lot, of clothing as well as antiques and all sorts of stuff from those 40s, 50s, things like that.
Yeah.
Nowadays, boy, it is. I mean, it's tough. You're looking at, 70s is like the earliest you're going to find a lot of the time. So as you are going around, you live up in the Pacific Northwest. So as you are up there, they do have some good vintage stores up there, by the way. Seattle has a couple of great ones. I'm sure Portland does too. But when you travel around, do you have like a list or something like that when you hit new cities for vintage?
Well, the change has been that the brick and mortar stores are, hardly any around anymore. There are still some, but that's been the biggest change. And so you're left with kind of what I had to do, because I do love vintage and finding it is the best part.
Sure.
Is to kind of keep your eyes open in any capacity to finding it. And that could mean anything from existing vintage stores, antique markets, antique malls, just, anywhere you can find it. And it used to just kind of drop in your lap in the 90s.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because there was so much more not only demand for it, but in the 90s we're talking 25, 30 years later now, where it's the law of averages that things go away after a while. They get harder and harder to find. They get thrown out. People don't find them again, or people like you and me bought them in the 90s, and now
and
are holding on to them. That's exactly right. And that's what happens too, is you get collectors that
sure,
they don't really collect anymore, but it's gathering dust in a closet somewhere, and so there's only so much to go around, and so eventually it dries up and you can't find it anymore, and you have to really, really, really hunt.
Yeah.
So I think that also the 20-year rule on vintage, I think, was created kind of for the industry, because if somebody goes, I only collect vintage, and that's only from the 30s through the 60s, like you said, then nobody would ever sell anything.
Right.
30 years later, or 50
years
later, or whatever. No one would sell anything. So they go, how can we continue to make money and get demand for past decades going, okay, we're just going to open the door and call it 20 years around there. And that gets kids thinking that they're interested in vintage and that they want to go buy vintage. And so it's still vintage, and technically, but it's not the same vintage as, say,
of course,
you and I look for, or did look for back then.
Right.
So it's a lot to be said for the vernacular that goes into that, and there's a lot of people that need to make money. So the rules kind of that dominates everything. The need to stay alive and sell vintage and make money for your business. is the thing that takes a lot of it, I think.
But you know what's interesting is that back when this swing revival was happening, and I'm not going to say it was the exact same time frame. It might have been a couple years before. It might have been a couple years after. I think it might have been a little bit before. But there was definitely it was new clothing, but it was based off of 19. Like there were a lot of bowling shirts, and rockabilly styles that were coming, and they were new clothes, but they were very much based on the 40s sensibility. Whereas there hasn't been anything like that in a long time.
Well, that industry has changed too. The music business has changed. The book writing and buying business has changed. The literary business, and the idea that a designer has a good eye and knows how to design clothing. I mean, the uphill battle to do that now, compared to the 80s, 90s that you just mentioned, is night and day.
Yeah,
and so that's why in the 80s, for instance, you remember there was what's that guy's name? Bruce Willis was on a show called Moonlighting.
Yeah.
And he was wearing double-breasted, Armani-inspired suits that were,
I remember those,
and the shoulder pads that women were wearing on clothes. BB was a company that made clothes for women, and the shoulder pads were like Joan Crawford shoulder pads.
Right.
So they were inspired by these classic fashions from the 40s, and then the environment was such that they could do that and be able to have people interested in buying them. I believe that those days just all come around again at some point.
Oh yeah.
And what will happen though is those Armani suits will be considered vintage by kids.
Oh yeah.
If they, when that does happen.
Yeah.
So the moral of the story, I think, is never throw anything out. If you can. If you have something that's classic, or that's cool, that has great lines, just put it away and wait, because eventually everything's already been done. It's just the trends are going to follow over time. Somebody's figured out an algorithm for it.
I mean, look at the just out of nowhere, the high-waisted jeans on women are everywhere.
Yeah.
Again. Everywhere.
Brian, I haven't noticed that, but I'm going to start looking.
Trust me on that one.
Are they back again?
They are. High-waisted jeans. Yeah. I mean, they went to the super low-waisted, and now all of a sudden they're all up to their, belly button.
Yeah.
Or higher, and it's crazy.
When I was in high school, it was Jordache. Everybody, all the girls are wearing Jordache jeans and knockoff Jordache, lines. But you wait. It'll be Jordache jeans and high candies shoes that they would wear them. You wait. It's just gonna, if it's not going on right now, which it probably is, it's gonna happen again. And that's kind of how it works, I think, with vintage. But something has to be pretty well made and have something desirable about it to be able to stand the test of time that way.
Sure. Yeah.
In demand, because there's an awful lot of crappy T-shirts that are out there that are never going to be wanted by anybody except to wash a car with.
So many. Yeah.
But the stuff that, like, from the 80s, like the suits that were in the film, The Untouchables. I forget who did that, but those suits are going to be back. I mean, it's just how it goes. That worked.
That was Costner and Connery.
Yeah.
Andy Garcia. Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
And I think that
Brian
those are classic styles that never go out of fashion. You can always wear them, but there's times, just like the swing revival, where the stars will align.
Right.
All that stuff comes back.
Right.
And all this cool stuff comes out of the closets, and then including the music and everything. So
okay, so I'm gonna jump on that comment you just made about how you should never throw anything away, and we're gonna segue into the fact that you have, I believe, if my information is correct, some approximately 9,500 belly warmer ties.
Yes, and probably a little bit more now.
Okay, so I did the math. I don't math very often, but I did the math on that. And if you wear one tie a day, You can go 27 years.
Yeah.
Because that would be, now I'm not sure about leap years and things like that, but regular
Let's get it right.
You can go 27 years and never have to rewear a tie.
I'll take your word for it.
So
I'm not a mather either.
So talk to me about the 9500 belly warmer.
Okay.
How did this start? Where do you have a storage cargo facility in China that you what's going on?
You know, I've never, up to that point, I never have collected anything in my life. I was never somebody who just, I mean, you see those shows on television and on cable that where somebody has one of everything or a bunch of everything in a huge warehouse. They just can't stop themselves. And that's not me.
Right.
I like maybe 2 or 3 things that I hunt. And one of them happened to be vintage neckties. And I was smart enough to figure out that I really needed to dial in on a particular era that I liked. And I figured out pretty early on, probably because I was wearing them on stage,
sure.
To perform in, that the wider ties from the right after World War II, which was late 40s into the early 50s, when the ties started to become narrow again and rock and roll came into fruition. But the wide, so it's like 3 or 4 years there where there were just that I really gravitated to because of the width of them. They were like paintings to me. And through the course of the years, I've been collecting over 30 years now. I realized that I've always called myself a vintage clothing collector, but I realized a couple years ago that I'm actually an art collector.
Okay, there you go.
And these ties are all little pieces of art, and the reason that I like the wide ones is because it's the wider palette for the art.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just can't get enough of them.
Do you have a couple of them there with you?
I do. I'll tell you that the reason I started, one of the reasons I really liked them was because it was one size fits all. You don't have to try them on.
Yeah. Yep.
When I'm rolling into St. Louis and I have to be at sound check in an hour and a half, and I have 5 vintage stores that I'd like to see. This is in the 90s. Well, I can go in there and eyeball everything that they have is really quickly, and maybe look at some, shirts, suits, or whatever. But this is something I can get through fast. If I like it, I got it, and I'm out the door. And I would come home with, suitcases full of them. And I really, really liked the aspect that you could put a line of guys together in the same color suit, but they could all be wearing different ties and all have their own distinct personalities.
Yeah. It adds a touch of individualism.
Right.
I mean,
and after World War II, there's so many companies making them. And the reason for that was that the country was sick and tired of olive, green, and khaki because of the war. Yeah. So fashions just took off, and especially for men. Colors, crazy, wider the colors, the crazier the designs, everything they could do to kind of stretch and make people realize that the war was over, that men could finally relax. So the loafer coats came in, and is it a coat? You don't know. Is it a sport coat? Is it a cabana wear? It doesn't. All these lines are being crossed.
Right.
But for business, men had to still wear suits and ties to work. When they go to work. But ties, where there was a way for them to have their own personality and to express themselves. And I think that's why I like ties so much. So I pulled a few because I knew you would be asking me this.
I mean, you have 9,500 of them, so
I had to find them.
It should also be noted while Johnny's picking these out, Johnny has an Instagram account devoted entirely to his ties.
Yes.
So if you just literally type in belly warmers in Instagram, that'll be the first account that comes up.
Yeah, thanks for the plug. It's amazing how many people are interested.
Sure.
So this is a
Yeah.
good example. Can you see that?
Beautiful. Yeah.
So this is really kind of what a traditional belly warmer tie would be. And the reason they're called belly warmers is because while this is a printed tie,
Mhm.
there are a lot of hand painted ties being done too by really good artists.
Right.
Usually in California, a lot of them in California,
Mhm.
and who had different names as artists painting ties because they didn't want to be, they were legitimate artists.
Right.
So this is a belly warmer because it's wide, covers it, it's like a blanket on your on your
Yeah.
chest,
Yeah.
and
course.
it's a nice warm, you know, environment on the tie. Nice warm depiction. So you have
Yeah.
belly, warm.
Well,
So the sunny beach ties were
Mhm.
really huge, you know, and so they got the term called belly warmers because for that reason. And then over time, the wider ties just started to be called belly warmers from that period. So that's why Instagram is called what it is.
And back in that day, a lot the pants were worn so much higher.
Right.
So the tie
Right.
would generally be here, not down.
That's
you know.
That's a good point. It's not like
At the
people
belt
wearing them
buckle,
down, wearing them down by their crotch now.
Yeah.
The suits closed a lot higher, and so
Mhm.
the ties didn't have to go so far. They were just kind of,
No, not at all. Yeah.
and so that's a good point because they hit right at your belly. That's
Mhm.
why they call them belly warmers. The wide and the short.
Mhm.
By
Yeah.
conventional standards today, they're like, I would say at least 4 inches shorter, or if not more. So here's another one. This one's kind of cool.
Yeah. Check that out.
So that's like that's an explosion.
It's unique.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's a good example of a couple hand painted ones that I pulled. This is a nice hand painted.
Yeah. Look at that. Mhm.
And it's this, and usually a lot of the best ones are on silk, like this one is.
Mhm.
But eventually, companies got smart and started doing them on nylon and to save
Yeah.
money because silk went to the parachutes for the war. Silk was
Right.
hard to get for
Right.
anything. Here's another hand painted that I like. This one I really like.
Yeah. Look at
This makes me feel like I'm going to an art museum.
that. Yeah. Pretty much.
So I found one that I think. Oh, here's one. Here's some horses.
Yeah. Look at that. Unicorn down there.
Oh, are they unicorns? Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
Good eye, Brian. Oh, and here's one that this is what really people really go crazy for online. They can't get enough of the girly ties.
Yeah.
So here's one that I don't think I've ever seen another one.
Yeah. She's got a ball and chain down there. Look at that.
The key to success. Yes.
Oh boy. Oh wow. Yeah. She's got locks on the bra. Okay.
But only one key. You only need one key to get all that. But here's one that I think I found. I'm not kidding you. Yesterday.
Oh wow.
This was from Atomic Magazine. In the 90s. Can you see that?
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, not great.
Anyway, that's me right there.
Huh? Okay, yeah. Yeah.
And yesterday I found the
there
tie.
you go. Mm-hmm. Look at that.
One of the wider ones that I had.
Remember? Yeah, that is wide, yeah.
I picked that one for that photo shoot because it was so wide.
Yeah. Like I was telling you before, my grandpa had a whole ton of those ties.
Yeah.
I wish I still had them. I don't, but yeah, I mean, I remember he was a suit and tie guy forever until the later years, and then he went into the bad long zipper jump days. But
everybody did. You could always tell somebody's age by at that time because they were still hanging on to what worked for them back in the day.
Exactly. It's still some type of a uniform, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the beautiful thing though, man, because that stuff never goes out of style now. And there were so many companies making those ties. I mean, it was like they released the shackles on the men's fashion after the war ended, and everybody got into the game. Right. So that's why if you can still find these out there, that's why, is because of the sheer mass of how many they made. But yeah, everybody has to kind of pick what they go after. That's kind of what I went after for a lot of those reasons.
Right.
The individuality for the most of them. I really like the feeling of being the only person on the entire planet wearing a tie like that. I don't know.
And so, so seriously, where do you keep 9,500 ties?
Well, I had them when I was living in San Francisco. I had them on a very long hallway in the flat we lived in, but now I keep them on rollers, rolling racks. I'm trying to figure out a way to organize them better because I'm working on a book, on a big coffee table art book of my collection.
Cool.
So that's been keeping me.
And how many? I mean, out of 9,500, how many can you fit into a book like that? A couple hundred, or?
No. I'm aiming for a larger book.
Okay.
With multiple ties on each page. So,
right.
A pretty good amount. But the hard part is finding them and then deciding which ones are worthy. But the Belly Warmers Instagram page that you mentioned is the kind of the testing ground for how I'm thinking about doing the book. So a lot of those, the way they're laid out and the way you can see them, the colors and stuff, that's kind of what I'm gearing towards for the book.
And there seems to be an interest in it, yeah? So.
Yeah, it's funny. That's the other reason why I did it, was to figure out what is the interest. And what I found is that I have anywhere from vintage clothing dealers who are interested in having Belly Warmers, the Instagram and a book as a resource, those who learned about it. And then designers, that's how, Ralph Lauren got his start, was these people go and poach, stuff from antique malls and stuff and bring it back and knock it off. And so a lot of designers are interested in kind of the fashions from this period, and they like the ties. And then you have other collectors, and you have it's amazing the variety of people that contact me and what they're interested in.
Right. All right, so let's slide into here. You are still making music. I know your last 3 albums, and
God bless you.
And so I want to talk to you about the music business for a minute, because obviously art and the way art is represented now, and then the way the artists are paid, has all changed so dramatically with the advent of the internet. If you recall back in the we're going to date ourselves here yet again, but back in the Napster days with Metallica, and they were having a little bit of a hissy fit over the songs being used and not getting paid for them, things like that. That was nothing compared to compared to YouTube and Spotify and everything else. And it's the same way in so many. I mean, it's the same. My dad was a painter, a fine art painter in galleries and things like that. Now with the internet, that changes things too, because you can get prints much easier than you could, with an actual painting. Obviously, it's changed for my kind of environment as a writer. I used to be able to go into Westwood when I was a kid near UCLA, and there would be, maybe 6 or 7 good bookstores that my dad would go to and I would kill time in when I was a kid. And they say never judge a book by its cover. That's not true at all, because I would just walk around and pick up books that I like the cover to. So remember that when you're making books. Anyways, the point is that now there's none. There's not a single bookstore, unless you're going to UCLA to the campus bookstore. There's no bookstores. There's no bookstores anymore. And unless you're talking about a Barnes and Noble, and let's be honest, that's God bless them, because they're out there, but they're a little bit like a facsimile of a bookstore, So and in music, obviously, we have these struggles, and you're still out there. You're still making music. You're still making good music. How has the industry changed in your eyes, 1998 or so to now?
Oh, that's a big topic. I think that when I landed a record deal, I think I was one of the few last ones to actually be admitted into that model, because after that, it really drastically changed. Like the Napster situation that you mentioned,
Right.
Metallica sued them and actually put them out of business, I think.
Yep. I think
But then Napster came back with blessing. What happened was the record companies did not embrace digital music. They resented it. They thought it would go away.
They didn't.
The peer-to-peer thing, they thought was just going to go away with enough lawsuits. Remember, they were suing little old ladies for the music that their grandkids sent them. And so, to their detriment, they didn't, and it let the genie out of the bottle, and they could not get it back in again. And they've been trying to figure out how to make money ever since that happened. Whereas if the record companies would have said, you know what, this is the way things are, it's changing, we are going to get in front of it and have some ownership to the property that's being used and the technology that's being used, the peer-to-peer technology that's ripping us off. But they didn't do any of that. And so the genie got out of the bottle, and ever since then, they've been trying to figure out how to, monetize the, basically the trading of music for free.
Yeah.
Streaming is a good, answer for that. That in my opinion, streaming is just is the same as Napster was. You're just, the amount of money that an artist makes for making something is literally just, it really just makes you realize that an artist is not doing it for the money at all, because there's no reason why anybody would do it for the amount of money that you make, streaming. From
individual songs and things like that.
Anything. I mean, they're not even doing album covers anymore because it's just so unnecessary that people don't even read liner notes. They don't want to know about them. They want to pick and choose the singles that they heard or like or think they'll like. And streaming allows them to do all that for $10 a month or whatever they pay. They get an unlimited catalog, and the musicians are just left out in the cold.
Right.
So
remember those old like Blue Note 50s and 60s covers and the liner notes on the back?
Yeah.
Those are fantastic, and the amount of information. I mean, they were in their own sense, they were a piece of art.
Right. There were whole record company departments set up just to make the art match what the music was, and to make it appealing for the buyer, and a lot of time and effort went into that, and that was part of the art of releasing music.
Yeah.
Where it's really just bits and bytes now.
Right.
People don't even know what the albums look like, well,
that's definitely something that's changed. I can tell you, not as a musician, but as strictly a consumer, is that there was once upon a time, not once upon a time, for most of our lives, you would go somewhere and you'd buy an album. You'd buy an LP, you'd buy a tape, you'd buy a CD. And, you might love the whole album, or, both of us, I'm sure many times, you bought an album and you listen to the whole thing and you go, oh, okay, I like 3 songs on that album. Right. But at the end of the day, you bought an album and the artist got paid for that.
Right.
Now it's so pick and choose. It's like, okay, I'm going to go on my iTunes account and I'm going to download that one and that one.
Right.
And I don't really need the rest.
Right.
And that has to have a dramatic effect on income as well, I would think.
Yeah. What happens is, like, somebody like Joni Mitchell, who was signed by a record company with the goal of grooming her to as an artist, to grow and release records as she went along with material that she's written and performed.
Sure.
And so the aim was to have just blockbuster hit albums by number 4 or 5, maybe.
Right.
Whereas the rest of them were kind of an on-ramp to get her up to speed, to try to groom her. And so when you fast forward now, where people can pick their own singles that they want, you're basically saying, hey, I don't want to wait for you to figure out, to make your style the best it can be and to make your music the best it can be. I just want you to be perfect and desirable right now.
Right.
And you better be, and every song better be a hit, or else I'm not going to buy it. You know, that's basically what it is. And
Right.
so what happens is there's the wind is taken out of anybody's sails that is not perfect artist right away. They're trying to grow. They're trying to learn the business. Everything else.
Yeah.
And you know, there's a lot of amazing artists. Their best work is the early parts of their career. You know, it's the growing pains that you hear in their music that makes them that way.
Sure.
Not after they're cashing, you know, huge checks at, you know, from record deals that they make, and they're trying to continue to write hits. Those earlier deep cuts off of those albums are the ones that made them who they are. And that's the most interesting music. So people aren't even going to see that though, because they didn't hear it on a TV show they were watching, or or a movie that they watched, downloaded on Netflix or whatever. And so the deck is just continually, every time I turn around, stacked against people who really want to create unique human art, music, and people that want to make money off of that instead of fostering that, the beauty of that.
And there is something to be said for developing your craft, you know.
Absolutely.
And you if every song you have to put out needs to hit the charts, you're never going to develop the way that you should, or that you could artistically.
You'll never get off the ground. I mean, you won't. It'll be not only. I mean, you will. There's a chance that you will, but it's going to be pretty hard, and you're going to have to do all the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
I got in right under the wire, I think, and it was an industry that was still fertile enough for people to be interested in live music. The swing revival was a catalyst that helped me and my band get to a point where we probably never would have otherwise.
Probably.
But there was still the interest in that movement. There was still interest in that scene. There was still interest in the music and live performed music, right? That doesn't exist, and it's very hard for anything like that to germinate now and grow, because of everything we just talked about, the way that music is bought and sold in bits and bytes instead of actually, you know, becoming a fan and wanting to go. The bands that are touring and playing live, the artists that are still doing that, the ones that really make the most money and that are able to survive are the heritage acts. You know, who have already made it in the business, and people want to go and relive, you know, another time maybe. But a young baby band trying to make it now, the deck is so stacked. It's just
when I'm driving out to my mom's these days, she lives out in the Palm Springs area, and because there's so many casinos out there, it's like every billboard I pass is either a weed billboard or it's a heritage act. It's you know, it's Journey, it's Kansas, it's Chicago, it's, you know, whatever it might be, playing at Morongo or 29 Palms, or, you know, whatever. And it's you're right. It's interesting. I mean, they get, I mean, good for them, I guess. You know, they get to do that, but yeah,
they were young ones, those heritage acts, and you wonder, you know, would a band even be able to get even near the foothold that they had, that they are able to do, you know, make a living now, you know, all these decades later, if the business was the same as it is now? And I don't think they would.
Right. Okay.
So what's interesting is we used to have a thing called SoundScan. Okay. And SoundScan was the measuring entity. I don't even know if it exists anymore, but it would basically measure record sales, and it would tell record companies how sales were going. It was like the holy grail of companies. They gave it to you straight, you know. There's no fudging, and they would measure through UPC codes, I think, and whatever codes were happening before then, what was selling in the record stores. This is before, I mean, they probably had mail order, but it was mostly record store sales. Sure. So I remember when YouTube was being kicked around, it was the devil. YouTube, you know, people were uploading songs on YouTube, and you didn't even have to buy it. You didn't even have to risk a peer-to-peer, like a Napster type situation. Right. You just get on the internet and go to YouTube, and somebody had uploaded an entire album and all the singles are all separated, and you could hear the whole album right there on YouTube.
Yep.
Right. And you didn't have to be arrested by the FCC. You didn't have to be sued by the record companies. It was all right there on YouTube. And now YouTube is a major player in measuring how music is being sold. And so record companies look to YouTube to find out not only if a song is catching fire or is being interested by, but they actually monetize YouTube now. So now they make money off of YouTube videos.
Yeah.
So it's like the industry is on its head compared to what and I'm just in the middle of, that was the mid to late 90s. The industry was completely different from the 80s, 70s, 60s, all the way back, So it's like, but in my opinion, the picture that we're taking right now of the music business is really sad, and very, very difficult for a baby band or young artist to even get a foothold, unfortunately.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, listen, you have your last album. No, it was an EP. Jump with Johnny, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that one was 2020. Is that correct?
I released that in the middle of the pandemic, because I figured it might be something that people would enjoy.
Sure.
During the weird time we were in.
Dancing around their apartments. Yeah. Yeah.
I tried.
Yeah.
It's
a really, I think there's 6 songs if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
They're upbeat. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Highly recommend it. So I have those albums through iTunes. Okay. Because I have an iTunes account for the whole family, what have you.
Right.
So I can download stuff that way. But the CDs themselves, johnnyboyd.com?
Yeah, I sell them, and Amazon sells them.
Okay.
Because of the change in the music business, there's no record companies anymore. There's basically 3 entities that own everything. Wow. For a solo artist or an artist that wants to continue to make music, put it out there for people and their fans or their family or anybody that's interested in what they're doing, you can basically cover most of the bases from Amazon, iTunes, and a digital streaming company that will distribute your music to as many streaming entities there are that you want to have it introduced to. So those 3 elements cover about 80% or more of the audience that is buying music now.
Gotcha.
It used to be record stores,
Yeah.
And a distributor would put the record, in the stores for you.
I remember Tower Records and Warehouse and Music Plus and
they had exactly, and they had power. So the industry was set up for the record companies, the distributors, and the record stores, and they would split almost 30% down the middle for all 3 of those areas. So what's basically happening now is you have record companies, which are usually just the artists, and the stores, or a place that the music is being sold, like the internet. So there's just a split, but the distributor has been boxed out because the record companies don't have the power or control anymore over the distribution of the music.
Right.
There was a time we were touring up the river, Mississippi. I think it was in Oklahoma. And we were driving up, I forget where we were headed, but we pulled over to get gas. And it was just in the middle of nowhere. And we got out and we were filling up the tank. And right next to the gas station was a record store. Or at the time, I don't remember if they sold actual LPs, but there were CDs. And so while the van was being gassed up, I decided to go over to the record store. And this is right after All Aboard came out, which was our first major release.
Right.
And I went into the record store, and I didn't have much time because we wanted to keep moving, but I looked, and every record store kind of organizes their stuff differently, So I went, this one happened to do just everything by the alphabet. Didn't matter the style.
Okay, right.
And I remember, so I just went right to the eyes for Indigo Swing. I looked, and I fed through, and this was right after the record had come out, right, like literally that week. And I walked over and I found the eyes, and there it was. There were 5 copies in there.
Nice.
5 copies in this, literally a rural, just piece of crap tiny little shack of a record store.
Right.
5 copies of the new record right there. And I said to myself, who's buying this here? Somebody, but the record, that's the strength that a major label distributor had, was that if you're going to be in business with us, then you're going to take everything that we have and you're going to put it in your store. And that's what they did. So here we were in the middle of nowhere. I couldn't believe it. But those kind of shops don't exist anymore. And those distributors are unnecessary now. They just add 30% where they didn't have to before. Now
bookshops don't exist like that anymore either.
Yeah,
they're used bookshops, and God bless them. I love that they're out there, and when I find one, I usually go in and buy something. But in terms of selling new work that the artist gets paid for, whew, it's tough gig out there.
Oh yeah. I remember when was it Barnes and Noble? I can't remember, but they had just started introducing live music performances in their bookstores.
Might have been Borders too.
Borders. It was Borders. We did a bunch of those.
Oh, did you?
I always said to myself, and I couldn't figure out why, and then I learned that they were actually selling music in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they were trying to find everything possible to get people into the bookstore to buy music and maybe books.
Maybe a book. Yeah.
While they were in there too. I
actually liked Borders quite a bit. They had a coffee shop, plus they did music, plus they did books. It was all, it was like one-stop shopping. They made
it a destination to go.
Yeah. But they went out.
I know.
They went under. All right, man. So thank you so much for coming by tonight. Hang out for a minute, but thank you so much for coming by tonight. You've been awesome.
Oh, we didn't talk about film noir, but I just want to emphasize that I really share your passion for the pulp and the noir in that period. Not only in the films, but the writing, it's everything.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah, that's the classic part of, I think, that period, everything from that period.
Yeah, completely agree.
The architecture, the films they were making, the books that were being written, the music that was being released.
The lighting, the cinematography.
Everything, yeah. Everything.
Awesome.
I'm watching a film noir almost every night now.
Nice.
Find one.
Nice. My favorite new channel is pretty much Turner Classic Movies.
Yeah.
I just watch that all the time. But
why not?
Yeah. All right, man. So thank you so much for being here, and
thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. It's been great. And ladies and gentlemen, Johnny Boyd, go to johnnyboyd.com, and he's got CDs up there. He's got information. He's also got information on his necktie, the belly warmer. So have a look there, and I will see you guys in a couple of weeks.
In this topsy-turvy